With a modern perspective, it's really easy to look back on a lot of games that were considered groundbreaking at the time and see them as nothing more than quaint, or gentle reminders of a simpler time. And then there are games that even in 2014 you look at them and think, wow, they did a lot with that game. And so that's why today I want to talk about a game that has ambition that impresses even today, Wurm, Journey to the Center of the Earth for the NES.
Wurm, Journey to the Center of the Earth, known in Japan as Chite Sen Ku Bazaruda, or Vazolder, the Underground Battle Space, was developed by Cyclone System and published by Asmik for the NES in 1991. Set in the futuristic year of 1999, mankind began using digging machines called VZRs to explore under the surface and investigate the cause of a sudden onslaught of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes. After the first 4 crews disappear, you play as Captain Moby as she searches for the lost VZRs and becomes embroiled in a subterranean war between underground races that is rocking the surface. It's really hard to define Wurm with a genre because of how ambitious the game is. You'll spend equal amounts of time piloting your VZR in vehicle sequences, taking out boss monsters in a first-person view, dodging and shooting in top-down areas, and exploring caverns on foot in side-scrolling action stages. In addition, the stages are linked together with cutscenes that move the plot along at the perfect pace. I say cutscenes plural, but really they just reuse the same cutscene animation over and over. I'm not complaining because it's the NES and anything like this is impressive. It's something that by all accounts should become comical, but the game's somber tone and surprisingly decent writing keep it from ever becoming a joke. The game starts you off in a VZR sequence, and if you don't know what you're doing, it's really easy to run into the game over screen in under a minute. You'll pilot your VZR, taking out enemies and navigating the terrain by making use of everything the vehicle has to offer. You can use the VZR's drill to tunnel through rock, or switch into a flying mode to cross huge chasms. In these sequences, you'll need to keep an eye on both your fuel and your shields. Flying and using your drill drain your fuel slowly, and defeated enemies can drop refills, so you're never really in any kind of danger unless you're really careless. Your shields, however, wear down very quickly as you take damage, and while they recharge rather quickly, if you take multiple hits in succession, it's very likely you're going to have to start the stage over. The first-person stages are super cool, even though they don't always work very well. You'll have a chance to talk to members of your crew to learn about the monster you're facing in order to increase your possibility meter. You'll get a few turns to talk, then you'll have to engage the enemy and try to keep yourself alive. Damaging the enemy also increases your possibility bar, and once it hits 100%, the next shot will destroy it. These stages can be super tough and frustrating if you don't prepare properly, so figuring out which crew members to talk to in which order is paramount to getting your possibility up as fast as possible. While these stages can get kinda wonky based on the guesswork involved as well as the really shoddy hitboxes, it's extremely impressive to see them on the NES. While there's no sprite scaling, things go in and out of the foreground often and the scrolling moves quickly as you scan the area and dodge attacks. The mechanics of needing to gather information to defeat an enemy rather than just blasting them mindlessly is also super cool. The side-scrolling stages that have you playing as Moby are mostly exploration-based, having you spelunking through multi-layer mazes seeking out people or items that will advance the story and open new paths. The controls here are also a little strange. As expected, A jumps and B shoots, but pressing up will perform a kick. There are enemies to watch out for, but as their only real strategies consist of jumping over you repeatedly, the best plan of attack is usually a quick duck, kick, duck pattern. While it seems cheesy, it's actually kind of tough to get the timing right and feels high tension in practice.
What I really like about Wurm is the variety that it presents. And while none of the individual pieces are amazing on their own, and sometimes the plot can get hard to follow, once you wrap it all up together, it's an incredibly gripping package. All these different things to do are going to keep you from getting bored because you're always going to be wondering what new area you're going to explore, what new monster you're going to fight, or where Moby's personal journey is going to take her. It's all good stuff.
Speaking of Moby, I'm thrilled to see another game of this era with a prominent female protagonist, especially a well-written one. Moby is surprisingly well fleshed out in the game's cutscenes, presenting a young captain who is bold and confident enough to lead her team properly and earn their respect, yet who is also vulnerable due to her young age and anxiety to find her missing friends and family members. She's wearing a skimpy outfit, sure, but it's more, this is early 90s sci-fi, and less, let's make our heroine sexy. Moby's gender is never used against her, which is awesome, and as a result, you wind up with a very well-realized heroine who carries the story very effectively from start to finish. Plus, Moby can now join Christine from Arkista's Ring as an official green-haired heroine of the Backlog. Unfortunately, the game's cover designers were not as kind to Moby as the translators were. This is the game's Famicom cover, showing Moby in all her early 90s anime glory. This abomination is the North American cover, showing what I presume to be Moby with a mind-melting perm, piloting a convertible Cadillac with a drill on the front. With cover art this bad, I wish I could tell you to just import the Famicom version, but the game just has too many words in it to play in Japanese. Just shove the cartridge in your NES and close the cover tight so you don't need to look at it. Ever. The game was designed by Shoichi Yoshikawa, who did the script and scenario direction for Golgo 13 Top Secret Episode. Comparing the two games, it's very easy to see the shared design, with both games featuring multiple similar playstyles. I'm not super familiar with Golgo 13, so I can't really get too in-depth on it, but I did think that was a neat little piece of trivia. Wurm's art design is pretty amazing considering the limitations of the NES. The caverns you explore feel spooky and claustrophobic, helping further the mood set by the game's scenario. The game doesn't use a ton of color, but it uses the palette well, lending tons of personality to the game's environments. Enemy designs are a little uninspired, and Moby's platforming sprite is a little rough around the edges, but everything animates well and looks pretty good for the time. Although pretty much every cutscene reuses the same graphics, they look nice and make good use of a variety of different character portraits to convey emotion. It's nothing fancy, but it's endearing, and it gets the job done. I'm impressed with how far Wurm pushes the NES. As I said before, the way they use different sized sprites in the first-person stages to give a feeling of things moving in 3D space is super cool, and it's all done without a hint of sprite flicker or slowdown. The game's soundtrack is probably one of the most underrated on the system. There are a few repetitive tunes spread throughout, mostly during the cutscenes, but in the action levels, composer Dota Ando really shows his stuff with solid tracks that inspires both courage and hesitation from the player, perfectly capturing the situation Moby finds herself in. These environments are designed to inspire both fear and awe, and the music does a wonderful job conveying that. My main gripe with the game is just how little direction you get if you don't have the manual or a walkthrough next to you. Even figuring out how to use the different modes of your VZR is a bit of a struggle when you go in blind. And for the record, the D-pad and A buttons will switch your forms and activate your gadgets. But the concept of figuring things out for yourself was a big draw for games of the era. Still, even if you decide to use a walkthrough, the game is a ton of fun to get through. The game uses a password system so you can walk away whenever you want, and while there are level select and invincibility codes, you won't need them. Once you know what you're doing, the game gets a lot easier.
And like every game I talk about, Wurm isn't going to cost you very much money, with a loose cart running you under 10 bucks. The nice thing is you don't have to worry about tracking down a box copy because the cover is fugly with a capital F. Save that money and buy other games I talked about.
Wurm Journey to the Center of the Earth was a super ambitious game for the time, and it manages to hold itself together under that weight incredibly well. Featuring multiple playstyles that are all a lot of fun, a surprisingly solid story, and a well-realized female lead character, it's a shame that Wurm isn't held up on a higher pedestal. But that's where I come in, I guess. If you see a copy in the wild, don't pass it up. Even in 2014, the game's scope is something to be admired, and this absolutely deserves a spot in your library.